Welcome to PrepWorks. My name is Robert. Today I wanted to spend a few minutes going through the economic data that was just released by the Fed earlier this week. This is something that I look at on a monthly basis to help me understand where our economy is currently at and where it actually might be heading. Now, I'm going to show you some charts and graphs that I put together. I'm also going to provide you with links in the description on where you can go to find this information for yourself. The Fed does release this information on a monthly basis, so I would encourage you to go out every month when the Fed releases the information and take a look at it. It will really help you understand what's truly going on with the economy. When you listen to what the administration or some economists are saying, data is very manipulable. You can make the information look the way you want it to look. So I think it's important to understand how to read the information yourself so that you can really get a better idea of what is actually happening. So let's jump into it. Every month in the news headlines, you hear the updated inflation number. However, the number you hear is typically the 12-month percent change for CPI or Consumer Price Index. I look at this every month, but I also look at PPI or Producer Price Index, as well as a multitude of other metrics to get a better understanding of our country's current economic state. PPI, as the name suggests, is indicative of inflated costs to manufacturers to produce and ship products. PPI should trend ahead of CPI and should be a good indicator of where the CPI or Consumer Price Index is heading. As for how things look with the CPI and PPI released this week for October, we can see that the increases we saw in the 3 months prior are starting to pull back. This is driven predominantly by gasoline prices dropping. A few months ago, the August inflation report showed notable jumps after over a year of declines. This was driven by sharp increases in fuel prices as the Biden administration attempted to replenish the oil reserves that have been heavily drawn on since March of 2022. The demand created to replenish the oil reserves surged oil prices. As a result, the U.S. has since pulled back on this strategy, and we are seeing those prices come back down. The one thing that I always look at, but never hear in the mainstream news, is how inflation has stacked over the last few years. You always hear about the annual inflation number and that it's softening, or you may even heard the term deflation, which is not accurate at all. You see, if we are still seeing 3% inflation, that is on top of the 8% inflation a year ago, which is also on top of the 6% the year before that. Consumer and producer inflation is still currently about 3 times what it should be. Now, the reason that it's important to understand is because you can start to unpack why inflation is still such a big issue in the marketplace and to consumers broadly. I've taken this data and indexed it to 2019, which is the last normal year we had before COVID. When we do that, you can see that wage growth since then has been essentially flat, while CPI inflation has risen 20%. Within that CPI number, I also pulled out a couple of important components that we all feel every day. You can clearly see the increases in housing, food, and yep, there it is, gasoline. These incredible inflation numbers are for basic needs. This is why I've doubled down in my prepping efforts. If nothing else, it will save me money in the future because everything is cheaper today than it will be tomorrow. Now, I know I touched on the fact that wages are essentially flat since pre-COVID, but now I'm going to walk you through a few more specific indicators on the overall financial health of the U.S. consumer. In a nutshell, it's not pretty and everyone's wallets are being stretched thinner and thinner. We are seeing increasing dependency on credit. In fact, it's the highest it's ever been. Taking a look at total household credit card balances, we're seeing a very strong climb. That decline you see for 2020, that's stimulus. During that period, we saw credit card balances declining and personal savings soaring. But once that ended, the financial strains were still present, so credit card balances have taken back off and are climbing month over month. So, as Americans are putting more on credit, we need to look at the percent of balances that have transitioned into delinquencies, that is 30 plus days. We've seen some pretty strong inclines, and it's not just momentary lapses because a similar trend is holding in the percent of balances that have transitioned into serious delinquency, which is 90 plus days. Now, that's pretty indicative of some serious financial instability. However, how do people feel about where their financial health will be a year from now? In a survey of consumer expectations published by the New York Fed, we can see that consumers are not anticipating relief anytime soon, with nearly a third of Americans expecting their financial situation to worsen. So let's take a look at what $1 is actually worth. This data is from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which indexes the purchasing power of the US dollar from the years 1982 through 1984. For example, the index value for October 2023 is 32.5, and that means that $1 you had in 1984 is now only worth about 33 cents, having lost 2/3 of its value. Now, looking at what has happened over the last 10 years, the dropping in purchasing power of the dollar was pretty consistent in the last 7 years preceding COVID, having dropped a total of 9% during that time. However, we've seen that drop another 15% in only the last 3 years. That means if you made $100,000 in 2013, you would need to make about $132,000 in today's economy. So make sure you're negotiating those annual raises, folks. Now, all of this gives us a better understanding of the current financial state of Americans, but how does this affect their spending? Consumers have been allocating more money towards services since 2022, and this trend will likely continue in the near term as consumers prioritize things like housing, medical care, and experiences over purchasing goods like food, household items, clothing, vehicles, etc. You'll hear in the mainstream media that consumer spending remains strong. However, this is largely being propped up by two things: price inflation and consumers shifting their spending more towards services. We also have a new pressure added into the mix, and that is the student loan repayments. This is a particular headwind for the high and mid-income borrowers, as many low-income borrowers will continue to make no payments under the newly launched student loan program called SAVE. Overall, 22% of consumers have student loans, and nearly all of them are concerned about how they are going to make their payments. Nearly 90% of consumers are saying they plan to cut back spending elsewhere to make their payments. And these payments are no small potatoes. They take a substantial hit to personal budgets, especially after not having to be paid on for the last 3 years. On average, payments are $566 a month, but there is a wide variation, with a third of them being between $600 and $1,000. Now folks, I was shocked to see how big student loans are in terms of total U.S. household debt. Student loans account for 9% of all household debt, and that includes mortgages, cars, and credit cards. This will most certainly have a hit to consumer spending that has not yet been fully realized in the economic reporting to date, as payments just resumed last month. The good news is that there may be some easement next summer as more options open up to reduce payment requirements for those mid to high income households. In addition to the impact of student loans, there are some concerns that overall consumer spending during the holiday season may be more muted than usual this year. People seem to be shopping earlier and intend to spend less in efforts to be more budget friendly this year. NFIB, or National Federation of Independent Businesses, is essentially a lobbying group that acts as a voice of small businesses at both the state and federal levels. They issue out a monthly survey to its members, which gives us a view to that core group of Americans. Independent businesses are pillars of our communities and countries, so I like to keep a pulse on how they are faring as well. Now you can see that their overall optimism index looks pretty bleak, particularly since COVID. This is almost entirely driven by two factors: their ability, or lack of, to get and keep quality labor, as well as inflation. Those inflated costs are directly impacting their profitability, which we saw take a bit of a hit in October. We also noticed that the October survey reflected a notable uptick in sales volume as a top driver for their profit hits. I think this could be another indication to the start of a trend as consumers tighten up their spending for the remainder of the year. Finally, I like to keep an eye on the monthly data provided by the Conference Board. They are a very reputable agency that, among other things, provides survey results to index consumer confidence. You can see that current consumer confidence score is notably lower than it was pre-pandemic and dropped for the last 3 consecutive months. The current dip is primarily driven by continued inflation, as well as the political environment and higher interest rates. They also published survey results regarding consumers anticipating recession within the next 12 months. Now, this was particularly high earlier this year and has softened some, but does still remain quite elevated, with nearly 70% saying they believe a recession is likely within the next 12 months. All in, there seems to be quite a bit of uncertainty out there, and as preppers, we should plan for the worst, and if it doesn't happen, we can sleep soundly knowing that we were able to grow our preps. I hope you liked the information I provided in this video. I'll be producing videos like this on a monthly basis when the economic data is released. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time.